So Rook is a lover of maths, which means if you're writing using his limited perspective in the same way that the novel does throughout most of the narrative, you're going to need to borrow from some of his world. This is about him using mathematical language for description. Early on, he talks about Euclid's world. That's the world of measurement, Euclid being the Greek sort of father of geometry. You don't need to use exactly that term, but if it was the case that you wanted to use people who were involved with that kind of mathematical history, that would be fine. The description here of Gilbert being an angled sort of man with shoulders at different heights is a simple description, but he chooses to use the mathematical language there. Rather than give a simple description of the moon here, you can see he's written all but the last fraction of its circumference was free. Words like fraction and circumference are the kinds of things that you could put in for description rather than just simply describing the moon on the horizon. In this description here, you can see he's chosen to describe this situation with the word quadrant rather than simply using it as the rock itself. And then when he's trying to give a description of those around him, you can see here he says in round numbers, indicating just how specific he is about everything. And then he describes what's around him, 800, 200 Marines, and even goes to the point of saying that the mathematics of control were precarious. So there's lots of these descriptions throughout the novel. You'll probably have noticed them. They're not the way that we would choose to describe scenarios that we were in usually, because that's not how most of our minds think. But if you're using the limited perspective of Rook, just as Grenville does, it's worth your while going to find some of these maths terms that you might be able to insert during the editing process. So beyond just simple description is him using Grenville using that limited perspective to use mathematics language to indicate his experience or feeling. If you take this section about Botany Bay, the simple geometry of the horizon itself, that word geometry being a maths kind of word, but he sort of sees the world in terms of shapes, and that's how he's beginning to be able to rationalise this situation that he's in. If we further look at where he's not feeling very happy about what's going on, being ordered about to go on that voyage, you can see he's using this sort of scientific language of puff and subside, and dust seemed weightless until you watched it fall, to indicate that that was how he was feeling. He was feeling as if he didn't have any substance, and he uses that mathematical language to do so. Later on, we can see this little part where he's describing the world around him, and you can see those words like balancing point, gravity, and cosmos, and then goes on to talk about even the father of sort of physics, Newton. And it's in this description that he's talking about just how awesome the little detail of existence actually is, and that he's aware of, in fact, how the science and physics of the world react on him. He's talking about gravity and how there's this tremendous hand of the cosmos that, in fact, impacts on him and those around him. The last example that I have there is when he believes that he's just come into sort of death, and this world, the word vortex there, is describing the completely overwhelmed, sucked up nature of feeling like it's the end and he's being overcome while he's on that ship. So the task here is for you to create a mind map or a brainstorm of as many mathematical terms as you can. Who thought you'd ever use all of the words that you learn in mathematics to be successful in English, hey? The point here is that if you've got a laundry list full of words, you may well be able to use them to replace different parts of your own creative writing. If you see an opportunity where it could be neatly inserted and use a mathematical term or a scientific term, what it does is it lends that limited perspective insight into the mind of Rook, how he experiences the world or how he would describe the world around him. And that's what Grenville does. it's also your task in this creative writing piece to be able to mirror the style of writing that Grenville uses. And this is one way that you can do it. So in 2 or 3 minutes, put down as many mathematical terms as you think that you would like to, and then you're going to go and find little points in your creative writing where you might well be able to replace or reshape or edit what you've currently written and try to make it seem more Rook-like. So you want to try to make use of your existing writing by trying to replace some, where appropriate, with that maths language that you've already mapped out. An example here for description is he tracked up the hill until he could see the clearing. It's the up the hill bit where you can see an opportunity. If we take the word gradient instead and replace the hill with the steep gradient, it becomes he overcame the steep gradient of the hill until he could see the clearing. It does nothing more, really, than give you a bit of an insight into the kind of language that Rook would use. All it does is take a simple bit of description and adds a bit of mathematical language in there. This example is about showing character, feeling, or experience. So sometimes we tell, not show, which is done in this example. Rook felt tremendous sadness welling up inside him. Now, that may well be accurate, but if we want to bring in mathematical language, we've got an opportunity here to take tremendous sadness and apply some maths so that we can show the experience that Rook is feeling. So you can see below here that I've had 2 goes at it. I've tried to take felt tremendous sadness, and in my first edit, I've put in the words subtracted and multiplied, so it becomes, it was as if Rook had had part of him subtracted and he felt the red begin to multiply in his face. But as I read it over and over, I realise that he felt the is sort of telling, not showing. And I also don't really like the way that subtracted sounds. It sounds as if I'm deliberately trying to use too many mathematical terms. So I go for a third edit, and in doing so I wind up with Rook, now less himself, found the hot redness multiply across his cheekbones. In doing so I replace subtracted with less, and I keep multiply to maintain that mathematical kind of language. It's subtle, it helps you in your editing process, and as long as you don't overdo it, you give that little bit of Rook insight to that's the way he thinks. And it should help you to craft those little sentences, particularly when he's trying to show how he's feeling, because you wouldn't imagine he would naturally be able to sort of psychoanalyze himself. Rather, he'd put things in rational terms. Mathematical language here helps with that process. Okay, so it's up to you now. You need to go into your own writing, highlight or find examples of your own creative writing where you think you might be able to reshape it using mathematical or scientific language. Don't overdo it. It's meant to be subtle. It's meant to just be folded in just like it is in Grenville's. But if you can do it 2, maybe 3 times, it'll be fantastic. You check it off with your teacher or the students around you. They'll tell you whether it works or not. And please make sure that in your statement of intention that you indicate you tried to replicate or mimic the style of Grenville in your writing by choosing to use the language of engineering, mathematics, science, physics, or whatever. Good luck.